Hello everyone and welcome to Demos Kratos. Welcome to this report, building a container house from A to Z. Actually, it's a report. It will actually be more of an interview since we did the report last week where we showed you all the basics of the container house with Bruno. And now for this video, I wanted to bring in Antoine, who is a state certified architect and who might help me develop my container house project. If I go ahead with this is an opportunity to ask you all the technical questions.
We'll try to answer them.
To really know everything from the foundations to the roof, the terrace, everything.
The finishing touches, everything. We'll have all the details of the construction.
We even have the book Building Your Container House. Yeah, now we're going to be in...
This isn't a sponsored segment.
No, but this little book is really handy. So this video is for everyone who wants very in-depth technical details about pretty much everything.
Very in-depth, we'll see how far we go.
Yes, but in any case, more in-depth than last week's report. If you missed last week's report and want to briefly introduce yourself again, now's your chance.
Bruno, originally restaurant employee, waiter. I retrained, not at all in construction, in information technology, and I built my container house. I started my container house in 2016 and finished in 2018, self-built and self-financed.
So you've been living there for 2 years now?
So now it's 2021. It's been about 2 years and a few months.
So that's good, and now we can look back a bit on what you've done.
Of course, yes. Now I already have 2 years of electricity and heating to see if it was viable, if it was a good idea. For heating, I'm at 80 euros per month for electric heating, and I just have a gas cooktop for the kitchen.
We can try to look at the project a bit from the very beginning to the very end. What's the very beginning?
The foundation.
The very beginning is buying the land. So buying the land, going to the bank to buy the land, and then applying for a loan for the house. And to my great surprise, my loan was denied. Since it was a container house and they didn't know about it and didn't want to take any risks, so I explained to them that there was no problem with termites. The termites would break their teeth on the metal and they wouldn't have problems with cracks in the walls or structural issues. Since, in fact, containers are almost indestructible. They spent 15 years at sea. These are containers on their last voyage. I ordered them in Lyon. They were delivered by crane truck and they were placed on my land.
So here, we're dealing with a construction that's still non-standard, meaning there are no unified technical documents that have been filed. There are no documents to certify it. Architecturally, maybe there's a possibility of getting a 10-year warranty or something like that. So what you told us earlier, for example, is that you hired a company, at least for all the foundation work, glazing and so on, to have those 10-year warranties that provide coverage for construction defects. For the entire construction, there's no 10-year warranty or any coverage at all. Everything went through.
The 10-year warranty doesn't apply because I'm doing self-construction. To get the 10-year warranty, you have to go through a professional. So I wanted to have at least a 10-year warranty for the positioning of the house in relation to the land registry, the local urban plan, the distances, and so on. The sliding glass doors come with a 10-year warranty, as they are the second most expensive item in the house. The containers have a budget of 7,500 euros, I think, including transportation. And then you have 4,700 euros for the sliding glass doors, just the sliding glass doors, not the windows.
So the bank managed to approve the loan for the land, so you were able to buy your land easily, and you did the rest all by self-building. And how did it go? Did you hire an architect to get the building permit? I'm lucky to have Antoine, but you...
Did you create all the technical documents, such as plans, site layout, and elevations on your own?
No. Actually, I'm lucky to work in the information technology field now, and I'm lucky to have clients who are architects. So I asked him to do it for free, but he charged me, though he charged me a little less than usual, because I take care of his information technology. And there you go. It's an exchange, a bit of service. And so he's the one who did my building permit for me. There was a request for confirmation or additional details regarding the technical diagnostic file.
Yes.
And then after that, what happened?
No additional documents or modified permits were needed. It went through.
Oh, no, because actually the house is more than 500 meters from a historic site, and it's originally a flat-roofed house. There's a law, I don't remember which one, but I could find it for you.
Our law?
The Arlo law, which actually allows flat-roofed houses in France, as long as they're technical flat roofs or green roofs.
The local urban plan posed no issues regarding the facade coverings or the roof, as previously mentioned.
The roof, no, the facade covering. You just have to apply the local urban plan like for a standard house. We can't use metal, or else people would construct houses with bays using steel sheeting. We're not allowed to use metal. Wood is completely allowed since it's natural, or otherwise stone or masonry, whatever we want.
So actually, as long as you follow the local urban plan, they didn't bother you about the building permit, right?
Oh, no, it's not because it was a container house that I had any trouble. Besides, the former mayor was a police officer, so he knew the laws well, and for him, it wasn't a problem at all. As long as it was approved by the ADD, we don't remember anymore. So they approved it, the mayor looked at it and approved it too. I didn't even have to make any changes. No, I didn't have anything at all.
Requesting a building permit before purchasing land can prevent being deceived by City Hall later on. You were saying you can put in clauses like, I'll only buy if they approve it.
When you buy your land, you can put clauses with the notary. So you'll have the notary for the sale and you add clauses, a guarantee clause. If you don't get your loan or if you don't get your building permit, you can back out of buying the land. It'll cost you the notary fees, 450 or 500 euros, but at least you can cancel the transaction.
That could be good. We find the land and reserve it, and then we ask the town hall.
You reserve it, that's it. You apply for a building permit, and if anything comes up, you put conditions on the purchase of the land for this or that reason.
But so before looking for the land, we already need to have our whole project with the building permit. Once we find the land, we can submit the building permit to check feasibility. Before searching for land, we need to...
The building permit needs to be updated with required documents, particularly a site plan. So with the house's placement in relation to the land, etc. So you first need to know which land it is. That's why you can make a purchase deposit or building permit with a clause stating your intent to buy the land, but with specific conditions. That's what you did then for the previous land. You apply for the building permit for that land. If the offer is accepted, finalize the sale. If not, seek another solution.
Start the process early by applying for your building permit before purchasing the land to avoid delays. That's why you have to do both at the same time. You need to work on your plan while you're looking for your land.
What's complicated is that you have to do almost everything at the same time, otherwise it's going to cause you really, really long delays. But once you've found your land, you place your house on it, depending on the north, south, east, west exposure, depending on... You're not going to put your living room facing the neighbors, you're going to turn it another way. So you have to do the site plan or the section plans. Once you've found the land and you want to figure out how you want to place your house on it.
So as you were explaining to us earlier, the previous plot was in a subdivision that hadn't been built yet. And actually, as the other houses around were being built, you gradually discovered that the way you planned to set up your house and what you were going to do might not really be suitable for living in every day.
It could have worked. Some people live that way daily. But the issue is, I had a plot of 433 square meters because nowadays the lots are shrinking more and more. And there I had a plot of 984 square meters for the same price and outside of a housing development. Yes, it wasn't serviced, but I'd rather pay 3,000 to 5,000 euros for utilities and have peace of mind without a neighbor right outside my window I'd have to greet or hand my coffee to.
Just so you know, servicing, for those who don't know, is basically connecting the property to utilities.
Connection to the sewage system, electrical connection, and phone line if you want it. I don't have a phone line here.
Because if it's already serviced, it means you have everything at the edge of the property. That's right, you always have a utility box.
You have a utility box where you arrive and connect.
And didn't you have the utility box?
I don't have anything at all.
You can see the utility box in the photos. You had it installed yourself, and that's what cost you 3 million.
Here are the connections, the contributions to the collective sanitation, etc., the various taxes and fees. And every week they add another one.
Once your land is serviced, you have to go along with it. You can't, except in certain circumstances, you can, for example, set up, what's it called? I forgot what it's called. It's the thing where you put the tank. And like you said, it's in a particular situation if you want.
The septic tank, there you go. As long as, so if the main sewer line runs through your street, you're required to connect, except in really exceptional cases. With tanks, retention tanks must be made. Those are people who want to be completely self-sufficient, but if the main sewer line runs through your street, you have to abandon your septic tank, seal it off if you have one, and connect to the main sewer.
Yes, okay. and about the last things on the land before moving on to the container construction part, all that. In terms of time, it takes a lot of time. After submitting the permit, it takes some time to receive a response. Even after obtaining the building permit, you must announce the construction start and wait several more months.
Posting the permit on the plot, waiting due to potential neighbor objections and administrative procedures.
At the time, I believe it was 3 months. You need to put up your sign and take a certified photo.
You can also have a notary come because they might say, oh, the sign wasn't put up, that's all wrong.
So now there are websites. You take your photo, you put up your building permit sign, you take your photo and you send it to a website. And actually that validates it for you. Notaries are no longer required as they cost money. Or what do you do then? You can also take a photo of yourself with a newspaper, take the photo and send it to yourself. You have the postmark and you have it with the photo of the newspaper, with the date. And so it's to make sure there's no dispute, that's it, physical proof. But now, I believe, I'm almost sure there's a website where you can send your photo and it's considered valid. You sent it on such and such a day, at such and such a time. And actually you get a kind of receipt to really prove that you did it on time. So for me, with the neighbors, there was no problem because they all knew there was going to be a container house. Well, the close neighbors at least.
You had done a bit of outreach with them to try to let them know.
I had asked them, I told them, look, I'm going to build an unusual house. There will be a container house. At first, they looked at me strangely, but after seeing the project, especially the neighbor on the right, he said to me, that's good. I fill containers all day at work and feel like I'm still working when I go home in the evening.
He assures, don't worry, it will have wood and look nice.
Outside fences and the local urban plan are expected to meet certain standards, though the specifics may vary slightly. You made the decision to install the container partitions that were present at that time, though I'm unsure if it was filmed earlier.
So I'm into recycling and optimization, meaning the container walls that were in place of the posts here. There are 12 meters, 24 linear meters. Actually, I used them to make my roadside fence. So I submitted a preliminary request with explanations, photos, and so on. So there's a corrugated wall for now, where there will be wooden inserts along the length to combine wood and metal, but it wasn't refused by the mayor either.
Let's move on to the construction part itself.
Yes, to the concrete part, the work, the foundations, all those things.
So shovel, pickaxe, and then hard labor.
You told us that you had hired an excavation company.
Exactly. Berger Public Works, which is in Garnerens, where I was supposed to build my first house, in the subdivision where it was cancelled. So I kept this person because he is very competent. He knows his job very well. So he was the one who took the measurements of the land for me, who did the excavation work. That means digging with the excavator. Once he had finished all the digging and leveled the land, meaning he spread out the ground a bit, he set aside the topsoil for me and put the less good soil at the bottom. So I bought in the materials and I did the reinforcement with rebar, braids, and so on. So I poured, I think it was 80 by 60 for the foundation. So it's a very, very good foundation. You can build a classic standard house on top of it, and then I put 4 rows of concrete blocks to create a crawl space underneath.
What's also interesting about your foundation is that it's a bit of a hybrid foundation. So for example, on the edges you have a strip foundation and then more of a pier foundation elsewhere. So regarding the main axes like that on the containers, was that a choice? So was it specifically to avoid the trampoline effect that often happens with this kind of structure, or was it more...
Exactly. So actually, I did a mix. I looked online for a company called Fondapieux. So Fondapieux, they make metal piles with a kind of screw, and there's a machine that drives the piles down to a certain depth. Actually, it's to reach a hard point, a hard spot in the ground, so it holds. The price of the pile stopped me right away. I think it's 200 euros per pile. For a house like this, you'd need 50, 60 of them. So no, that's not possible. And then I found out, so you can also make piles, concrete pads too. You can dig and make concrete pads. For me, the simplest thing is that we made a peripheral belt, a peripheral foundation, and in the middle we put 4 concrete foundation pads with cinder blocks on top.
And so it was really the type of soil that made this possible, because for example, on limestone soil we might have had to use another construction technique. Here, from what I can tell, you really have loose soil.
It's clayey, a bit clayey and sandy. And so here it's Mr. Berger who saw that the land was suitable for it. He dug to the right dimensions. He made trenches maybe a bit wider and we didn't have any structural problems. The empty container weighs approximately 3.7 tons or 3,700 kilograms. There are barely 10 tons of container in total. Compared to a standard house, that's nothing at all.
So you could say that you almost oversized your foundations in this case, or you can really just set down what you have and have a solid foundation. Plus the 10-year warranty, since you went through an independent contractor.
Yes, the 10-year warranty. By the way, is it only for the whole or is it for the entire foundation?
The whole, because he wasn't the one who poured the foundation? Yes, actually, the company guarantees what it does. So they guaranteed the hole and the footings, well, the holes for the footings. But I was the one who did everything related to the foundation. So there you go. But I still got some technical advice from him because he knew the land well. He's local and knows how things should be done. And when he saw the weight of the containers compared to the foundations and the width of the foundations, well, he made foundations that were, let's say, standard or even a bit more. And the weight of a house, I don't know how much that could be. So you would have to calculate the weight of the rubble stone based on the number. But actually, it's nothing at all. Containers are much lighter than a standard house.
There's a lot of talk about containers lately. Where did you buy yours? How much did they cost? And where can others find them? Because I checked a lot of websites, but it was really hard to find where to buy them, at what price, the transport, the installations. It's a whole logistics process.
It's about organization, time spent, and visits. I'm lucky I'm a self-employed information technology specialist. I worked at Renault Trucks in Vénissieux, and actually behind Renault Trucks in Vénissieux, there must be 800 or 1,000 containers stored there, which are being sold. Back then, they weren't very expensive because there wasn't yet the container boom and the interest in containers. I paid him around 1,500 euros for the containers before tax. And then you have to add 500 euros for the transport of the container.
We're dealing with containers at the end of their life, having been used extensively with around 15 years of travel on the seas.
I still have the plates. We can look at the plates on the doors. But yes, these are containers that are at the end of their life. So they're marked. They have a history. The walls, there are marks, marks not from bullets, but there are marks from loads. On the roof, there are, well, these are containers that have been through a lot, but the advantage is that now they're insulated, they're protected from water, not from air, but still they're heated inside. They've already spent 15 years at sea on containers, in ports, on trucks. Now I think my daughter, my granddaughter will always see this house standing.
And you chose the containers yourself that they were selling you. You were there, you said, that one.
Yes, I looked because some were more damaged than others. There were some I didn't like. Afterwards, I went inside, we opened them, we looked. The third option, which I didn't select, had doors that didn't shut correctly. Despite being guaranteed watertight and intact, the doors failed to close. And there was a small hole in the roof. Well, the roof isn't really a problem because I put, there's polyurethane on it and there's a steel tray on top. But I also put tar on it and then a strip of metal tar on top to seal the hole. So now we're good, it won't move.
The container structure consists of the well-known International Organization for Standardization corners at each corner. And then you have these large metal struts that you came to cut. We may discuss it further when we reach the interior finishing stage. Structurally, the container itself won't move. And now you welded them together.
They are welded and bolted together, so I don't see what could make them move.
Can you explain a bit how you put all three of them together?
So the crane truck came to set them down. There you go. It set them down, as we say. I tightened them together with a transport strap. I pulled them close to each other. We welded them on the International Organization for Standardization corners. So we welded at the top and at the bottom. And then along the entire length, we sprayed polyurethane foam inside. After that, we applied some silicone. And on top of that, we put aluminum tar, like what you put on ridges or things like that to protect the joint between the two containers.
And was that a professional thing or was it just thrown together? You put on a bunch of layers. Was there a reason behind it? Or did you just think, I'll put as much stuff as possible to seal it up?
Well, it was intentional because polyurethane expands anyway, so it fills all the holes and gaps. Polyurethane isn't waterproof and eventually seeps through. The silicone layer was added to improve water resistance. The tarred aluminum was used for protection with aluminum placed on top of it. When I did it in the summer, it was very hot, putting it on in the sun. The containers heated up rapidly, causing the tar to stick, similar to a tarred roof.
And so it actually lets you make a kind of seal, actually a seal, what do you call it? A kind of expansion joint between the containers. Due to thermal expansion and the insulation from outside heat, there may be less of that phenomenon occurring now. But then at the time of construction, when you had to seal all that, did you build more in the summer or in the winter then?
Over 2 years, there was both summer and winter. I know there are things you don't do in the summer and that are better done in the winter. But for the tar, it was better to lay it in the winter. So it was actually laid in the summer.
Why didn't you weld it directly?
Because actually, you would need to make a 12-meter long metal plate.
Not to weld.
You'd have to weld 24 meters back and forth because you weld on both sides. Yes, that's the first time. And after that, you have to do it on the second and third container. So that makes 12 and 12, 24, 48 meters of welding.
It takes more time than bolting everything and applying the silicone.
With a bolt, you just make a thread and then you put it in, you know. But with welding...
Welding, actually, yeah, there you would have needed, well, I don't know, I'm not a welder. Then again, sometimes it goes really fast. First of all, it's raw material. So welding rods, electricity, because the welding machine uses power too, that's consumption. But what's the point? I mean, I don't see the point of welding all the way along, since once you've put the polyurethane seal, the silicone seal, and the tar on top, it's not going to move.
Let's go back a bit to wrap up the part about transporting containers. There's actually a problem, especially with very large containers, because not all roads are suitable for transporting these kinds of trucks. So it's not something that's possible, for example, in very remote areas. I imagine the road network back then was sufficient to allow trucks and other vehicles to arrive. But did it then require some preparation in advance from the company?
No, nothing at all. They just asked me if the trucks could get through. So at the corner of the street there, if you came from the left, there's a truck driver who lives over there with a semi-trailer. And there I have livestock trucks passing by for the farmers and milk trucks too. So yes, it's tough, yes, but they still manage to do it. So these are small country roads. We're not on big main roads. Well, there are big main roads further away, but here it's a hamlet, so a hamlet isn't. If you've seen 10 cars go by since this morning, I think that's the absolute maximum, right?
If they even manage to get here. After that, I looked at properties further up in the mountains where prices are a bit higher.
You have to look, right?
You have to ask the company. So before I look for my land, I should ask them what I need to look for.
Otherwise, later you can find a farmer in the area with a cart or with wheels. Then you have the wheel adaptation that you can put under your container, which is pulled by a tractor.
And so as you were telling us a little earlier about the actual placement of the container, did you have a crane truck come in just for that?
Well, the crane truck, I was lucky at the time. The crane truck was included for free. So actually they came, it was a truck, a semi-trailer with a Palfinger. Well, a Palfinger is the crane behind the cab. He arrived, he took his first container and set it down. Then he removed his trailer, well, his semi-trailer. He came back and the other trucks arrived and he took them and set them down.
So you actually blocked the whole road for all the neighbors?
No, because they parked a bit further away in a field by a little dirt road. Those guys are really skilled. When they make a maneuver, they do it with their eyes closed. They can fit into the tiny space. Some paths are over there. They backed in, which I thought would take 3 days, but they managed it in 10 minutes.
This is due to you informing us about the problem, particularly with lifting the containers, which required some unconventional techniques, with the electric line, which is a twin line.
Yes, that's because you have to go under the wires and everything.
So there's the electric wire. So after that, we can adjust the height of the chain in relation to the container. And actually, we had an issue with the placement of 2 containers. For the second container, we had to turn it around as it was coming in. When it arrived with the doors behind us. And for the second container, I wanted the doors on this side. To reduce cutting, I was cutting the hinges to install the bay window, so we had to turn the container around. That was the only major issue. Later, they touched the insulated sheathed wires once without causing a spark or any problems.
How long did it take to install those 3 containers?
I'll say, let's see, I'll be generous, but maybe I'll say 3 hours.
So a day, you set aside a whole day?
Half a day. The goal was to complete as many containers as possible in a day, and they achieved it in half a day. They arrived at 9 in the morning. I think by 11:30 at the latest, it was done. There was a hole, and by the end of the morning, there were containers.
That's why it also reminds us of the importance of having a good foundation before the containers arrive. I imagine you must have sweated a little when placing them, thinking if you made a forcing a mistake and then the thing doesn't fit on top anymore.
I left some margin. The cinder blocks are around 20 to 25 centimeters wide, so I had a bit of leeway. I double-checked the measurements multiple times. I went to Vénissieux, used a tape measure, and carefully verified the measurements. Then there was a little problem. I hadn't calculated that the covers, the International Organization for Standardization corners at the bottom, are 2 centimeters thicker. When placing the containers, they didn't cover the entire perimeter. Afterwards, I used a hydraulic jack to lift them, slide boards underneath, and set them down on top.
We might talk about it a bit more later, but also about your foundation system that you put in place with that staggered foundation with a block like this and a block like that. We might talk about it when we discuss the exterior framework, but that's when you made that system to allow for the installation of your framework afterwards. So all those elements, we'll talk about them in detail over there, but just to mention it, since we're talking about the foundation, it would be interesting to revisit that.
Since we've seen the containers being placed and welded, we can quickly talk about how you cut the containers.
A can opener. We take the can opener and then we go for it.
The big grinder, you know.
It's called the can opener, but it's actually a grinder.
No, then I could have done it. So I took my time, like I already told you. We think before we do things, because once it's done, you have to undo it. It's a bit complicated. I really cut 80% of the container with a grinder, with a small grinder of a small diameter. Some people are going to be shocked by that, but it's okay because
we're in the non-standard here.
I'm fine. Yes, we're outside the standard, but it's true about the bottom. I did that with a big grinder because actually I would put the grinder on the ground and move it slightly. To cut both panels simultaneously, I cut the inner and outer containers, as there are actually 2 containers. There were the 2 walls, so with one pass, I was able to cut through almost both walls. So that was the easiest part at the bottom because we took the tool, set it down and pulled it, then we moved it afterward. The most difficult part was holding our arms up all day at a height of 2 meters 30, so by evening we were exhausted.
Did you do that with the grinder too?
Yeah, the top part, I did it with the grinder. Let's say at the top it's 50% with the grinder and 50% with the plasma cutter.
Why didn't you use the plasma cutter for everything? It's easier after all.
Yes, it's easier. The metal melts like butter. It's crazy. But it was someone who had it and didn't have time to do everything for me. He only did the parts that were most important to him. Actually, for him, I did the pre-cuts. Actually, I did some pre-cutting. I made some cuts with the grinder and then he came in. He just finished up to make the plates fall. Similar to these sliding glass doors, they were pre-cut with only the corners remaining. I finished those with the grinder and he also finished up to make the plates fall.
So they weren't pre-cut?
I pre-cut them myself. Actually, I did some pre-cutting and, you know, back in the day, we used to do little folding things you tear like that. And, well, that's exactly it. I pre-cut and then he came along. He finished by making the plates fall.
And for me, the question that comes up is when you cut your plates, did you sequence those cuts? As shown in the large 50 square meter space you opened up, we have elements that were recovered from the construction site. Did you have to sequence them to avoid deformation issues around the door there?
In the photos, you can see that I cut a first section of 2 meters and I also cut the second one on the other side. I left the part attached, still holding, then went back, took another meter and cut again. And actually, that allowed me to support it. And once I had almost removed everything, I took my measurements, my dimensions. And I placed the construction props every 4 meters.
The construction props were placed directly on the pilot foundations that you made underneath, as you explained to us off camera.
So underneath it supports under the pads that I made. So 4 meters from the edge of the perimeter wall there, under the construction props, I have a crossed concrete pad, well, a crossed rubble pad that actually supports it. It's to keep the load off the container.
So, and this choice then of this element, which is actually quite strong. In fact, when we went inside, it's something that really caught my attention. You see, when I saw that, I was like, wow, but what is this thing? Because usually in this kind of construction, we would typically use standard I-beams or things like that. Was it really the cost per square meter of the standard I-beam that made you decide not to use it? Not to make large frames like we can see in other structures.
We can make large frames. After that, it's engineering, it's load calculation, it's strength calculation. I lack basic skills but hold a professional certificate as a restaurant employee. I'm now an information technology specialist with some business knowledge, but that was really the easiest and cheapest way. A construction prop costs 13 euros. If you start making I-beams with a standard profile, doing welding, because then you have to weld them. If you have welding skills, you can do it yourself. But in this case, I had to bring someone in and get others involved, and that was definitely going to cost me money. Because, well, the person has to travel, the person comes to work. It's normal to pay people who work too. So for me, that was the simplest solution. It was a construction prop with potential modifications later on. If I ever managed to find some nice decorated posts to give it a bit more style, something a bit nicer than this. But for now, that's it. It stays in the style. It's metal. That's it. Also, maybe painting them white, like Julian said, that could be a nice touch too.
Like you said, maybe partitioning it off because you put a wooden support underneath to hold it, and you can make a partition like you did with the elements around it.
As for wood and metal, that's it. It will only be medium density fiberboard, like the casing for the technical housing shaft. It can serve as a reminder indeed.
And to finish with the section on cuts, because I'm really curious about it, I'm thinking if one day I ever have to cut, I want to know if you had to do it again now, if I gave you a plasma torch. Would you do everything with the plasma torch, or does the grinder really have an advantage at certain times?
So, if you want to do it like on the ceiling there, if you want to make straight, clean cuts as close as possible to the structure, you have to use the grinder. Because the disc is much thinner, a plasma torch, there's a nozzle that's a bit conical, so actually you can't really cut flush. Here, if you look, we cut with the torch. What do we still have? Maybe 2 centimeters in some places, 2 centimeters of metal left. It's not a big deal. It all depends on how you want to finish your ceiling, like we said earlier. Maybe just a piece of medium density fiberboard that goes with LED lights above, backlit. That could be nice too. That's for later. Or maybe a brushed stainless steel U. It all depends on how you want to do it.
Because really, if you leave it bare like you and stick LEDs on both sides, for example, to work on the thing, you can do everything with the torch. It works well.
It works well. It all depends on whether you want to do it quickly or not. If it wasn't my torch, I could have rented one, but renting costs money. It's always an expense.
You also need to factor in the cost of the disc, grinder, and other equipment.
Yeah, but it's not very expensive. If you'll find it in the Excel file. You'll see the discs are listed. It's detailed. It's not very expensive. And the discs, yeah, I use them all the way. At the end, there was only the rim and the metal left. It was clear.
Using the grinder will be more of a hassle compared to the torch, so you might save time with the torch.
So actually, yeah, I started by making some pre-cuts, and then I really used the big one to finish certain things. And again, I really wasn't in a hurry. That's the thing. I really wasn't in a hurry. That allowed me to take my time and do it the way I wanted, the way I saw fit.
That's also why it speaks to me. To finish up on the cutouts, you also chose to keep the container wall for this interior partition. And so can you tell us about the limitations you encountered, especially during installation, when you couldn't put in the insulation, things like that? In terms of soundproofing, for example, when you're in the living room having a conversation, can that be a problem? So since you decided not to do any interior work, did you also decide not to put up any partitions or interior walls? So do these elements, when there are bumps or when people are talking, does it become a problem in the different rooms of the house? Or did the air gap that remained between the two containers help a little?
So yes, there is the air gap, and also at most the walls of the containers are corrugated. So actually it really breaks up the sound for the microphones. You might have noticed that. There's less resonance, there's very little resonance. And even when the container is empty, there's less resonance than in an empty house. Because actually the wave, the sound wave, is broken up by the ripples. So here we have a first phase, it's inside, there's a second wall. So actually it breaks the sound twice. Afterwards we can't cut the sound in half, that's clear, but if we really want to, we can either put up some films. I think there are acoustic films, I don't remember exactly what they are, but they exist, it's a kind of acoustic film. Yes, we can use that with drywall and many other things.
Yes, or put in furniture, like you were saying.
A piece of furniture, to break it up, it absorbs. With a sofa, the cushions, they absorb a lot of sound in a room.
There you go. You said you have a second room where people sometimes sleep and you watch television. Here, it doesn't wake them up at night.
No, that's clear.
It's totally livable, actually.
It's completely livable.
I think people, in their minds, they say to themselves, we must hear everything through it. It's not a wall, it's just metal, it transmits all the sound and everything. No, actually, it still acts like a wall. We tested it beforehand.
It's clear. We didn't hear the neighbors much, even though they went outside. We barely heard the scooters, 2 scooters that went by. They greeted me because they know me well.
Any noise we hear now is from the drones filming.
So after what we hear, because you can't hear it inside a house, then we'd have to do a test. But in terms of decibels, it's totally fine. You can hear the rooster crowing in the morning, the little birds, but that's through the open windows.
That's nice, that is.
So we'll see about the connection as well, actually. For that, do you want us to talk about the window part, Julian?
Yeah, we'll talk about the window part.
Because the window is actually what raises the most questions, whether it's about heat loss, managing heat, things like that. How did you handle the installation of the windows? What installation choices did you make? Did you go for a tunnel installation or more of a frame installation? What was your choice?
So for me, it was a tunnel installation for two reasons. Because actually I made a wooden frame. Why? Because I could have made a metal frame, but you need to know how to weld, and I don't know how to weld. I don't have the skills, and wood is easier to work with than metal. For me, it allowed me to cut and make a wooden frame of, I don't remember, 27, 2.5 centimeters, 330 or 32. Was it 27 or 32? And to install windows and sliding glass doors in the tunnel.
Did the company handle the entire installation, or did you have to do a lot yourself?
So I made the frames, they came to take the measurements. After finishing the frames, they manufactured the sliding glass doors and then installed them for the 10-year warranty, the famous one, because like I told you earlier, they put in shims. They used a kind of polyurethane, but it was very, very thin. They have their own tools. Well, you know, it's their own equipment and it was done by professionals, so I have no worries on that side. I installed the windows myself, but the sliding glass doors were done by them, and the windows, I installed them myself. I bought them myself and I installed my windows.
Isn't installing windows a hassle? Especially when it comes to insulation.
For insulation, we're using a wooden frame, so wood itself is insulating. There's a break between the metal and the window thanks to the wooden frame. And then on the outside, we have polyurethane that comes right up to the wooden frame and covers everything. Actually, I made the frame stick out by, if I'm not mistaken, almost 20 centimeters. So that allowed me to wrap the polyurethane all around it.
That allows you to limit thermal bridges at the joint between the window and the wall. And so like that, it allows you to have something with better inertia and also less heat loss.
And also when I installed the polyurethane panels, I then injected polyurethane foam around them to really break the thermal bridge and provide protection.
Speaking of polyurethane, we can talk about exterior insulation. How did you insulate this container house?
I insulated using recycled polyurethane that had cosmetic defects and missing spots in some areas, which would have otherwise been discarded. So I bought that from a company in Auxerre that sells it. And that guy buys it from Knauf. Knauf is a big polyurethane manufacturer near Auxerre, and he buys all the downgraded ones. I don't know if he still has the contract, but I think he probably still does. And actually, he delivered it to me. So there are 200 square meters of 16 centimeter polyurethane and 84 square meters of 3 centimeter polyurethane for the floor. For the interior floor, I put polyurethane directly on the floor. And actually, I got it for the sum of 3,000 euros. 3,000 euros for the insulation.
So why did you choose polyurethane? Was it because it was the cheapest option? What's the advantage of polyurethane?
The advantage is that it was cheaper and it was easy to work with. Because with a kitchen knife, you can cut it. It's a bit tough, but you can still cut it. And what else? At 10 per SQM for 16 cm, it was unbeatable. Now it's up to 20 per SQM, maybe more.
It's still better than other insulation types?
The answer depends on your lambda value and thermal resistance, which vary based on the insulation material. For example, polyurethane has a specific thermal resistance value that I'm unsure of.
It was 7 something.
Is the same insulation layer you used. 16 centimeters for the roof and for the walls. There are also questions about the 2012 thermal regulations, especially. For example, for roofs, you need a thermal resistance of 8, for example, or for the walls, a minimum thermal resistance of 6. So if you have a thermal resistance of 7 throughout the house, that can be sufficient.
They calculate thermal resistance, which is around 7 point something. I'd have to check the exact value. There's also the lambda value and another one you mentioned.
There's the lambda and the thermal resistance.
But I know that the thermal resistance, back then they only looked at the thermal resistance and it was a thermal resistance of 7. That was the best there was. You would need 40 or 60 centimeters of glass wool or something like that.
You previously quoted 3,000 for insulation, but now you've doubled it to 6,000.
Yeah, I think so now.
And the €1 insulation. We get calls about the €1 insulation, so why don't they come?
For the renovation?
That's for houses, especially with the environmental regulations of 2020. Now, because it's more ART, it's the environmental regulation, you have all the houses actually that are in energy consumption, I think final energy or something like that, which will not be available for sale or rent because they're too...
Water insulation.
So that's water insulation. Actually, it's to motivate people then to have a house with better energy efficiency with less loss. Insulation is typically installed during renovations. After that, you can seek other assistance for insulation elsewhere.
The assistance on TPE.
TPE is important. Give money to Demos Kratos.
You were saying about the polyurethane, actually. You welded spikes onto your facade. You put pieces of wood. We can see all that in the photos you gave us. You put your polyurethane, you put your wood cladding. But you told us there might be a simpler way, maybe, which is to have sprayed polyurethane.
So yeah, at the time I looked into it. It was much more expensive for me because I found this downgraded polyurethane. And that's why I had so few expenses for the insulation. And if I had wanted to, or if I could have added another 3 or 4 centimeters of polyurethane since my rafters had enough space. But sprayed polyurethane, yes, that can be interesting because it really creates a sealed box. You're out of air there. I needed to add more polyurethane between the panels. Typically, tape is used to connect panels and prevent air from passing through. It could also be in terms of time. In half a day, they build your entire house for you.
However, consider the ecological perspective. What is polyurethane?
It also questions the dew point, for instance. So especially with corten steel, which is a type of steel that can corrode and can develop pathogens, things like that.
But it weathers. It corrodes, but it weathers.
Yes, but there can be pathological issues for the insulation. Polyurethane's advantage over other materials was its built-in vapor barrier, which is mandatory.
Yes, you don't have that in sprayed polyurethane then?
The vapor barrier must be placed to prevent condensation caused by dew point, either under the rain or in a specific location. And then a vapor barrier, that's it. And so after that, we can also imagine you made this choice because you had access to this type of insulation. But it's also possible to imagine after insulation using anything, whether it's reed, wool, straw, or traditional insulation materials like rock wool. In this case, you chose to access this information because it was available to you.
Yes, they delivered it to me, which was advantageous since I didn't have to pick it up myself. Insulating a 100 square meter house externally costs 3,000, which is a significant financial burden, except with the current one renovation deals. The insulation is not expensive and measures 16 centimeters. They double it by placing one layer vertically and another horizontally, resulting in a total of 32 centimeters of insulation. But I don't think you double the benefit, that's the issue. But I would have had a much easier time if someone had come and sprayed the polyurethane instead of me doing it myself, that's for sure.
So the expense for that part,
it would have easily doubled, I think.
You were on something really, really cheap for your 50,000 euro house. But for us, when we have to budget for that, we're going to be on something much more... We're never going to manage to find a deal as good as yours, actually.
Currently, maybe in recycled polyurethane, because there are a lot of roof sandwich panels that are recovered, where they remove the polyurethane underneath. And they resell it, but they still resell it at an excessively high price.
Afterwards, you can also turn to reuse channels. There are a lot of them. Well, I know, for example, I talk about it all the time anyway, so there you go. For instance, Bellestock in Paris practices reuse by recovering scraps, leftovers, or materials from demolition sites, and which allows, as a result, access to materials that are not necessarily downgraded or materials that are non-standard, but which would allow savings on those items. Afterwards, it depends on the preferred insulation type. The advantage of your house is that you chose a compact cube-shaped design. That way, just by combining your containers, it allowed you to have insulation that was easy to install, whereas, for example, if you had added another floor, or actually, depending on the shape, the insulation and the amount of insulation you need would change a lot. So that's really the advantage of this shape as well. So you have an architectural shape that is quite simple in itself, but actually, in the context of self-building, it allows you to implement all these solutions as well.
I wanted something simple, to struggle less, indeed. The more complex the shapes, the more problems, time and money you'll spend. I could have built a second floor, but the problem is that it would mean more insulation, more cladding, more wooden frames. All those factors contributed to the costs. Since I was building the house myself, without the bank's backing, I had to self-finance the project. So I had to work to earn money, but I also had to work on my house to make progress. It's a balance, you have to find the balance and do it.
And then once you insulated everything, did you put up wooden siding?
Before installing the wooden siding, I constructed a wooden frame and structure. Actually, the polyurethane panels were placed against the container structure, where I had welded anchor bolts. That left marks on my polyurethane panels, so I took them out and drilled them with a hole saw. It's a tool that was made for me. I have a hole saw. At first I used the hole saw, and then I chose the tool to make a round hole in the polyurethane where the anchor bolt had left a mark. I put the panel back in place, and then I screwed in a wooden shim that went through the polyurethane so that there wouldn't be a thermal bridge. So the only place where there was a point of contact was on the outside wall at the anchor bolt, but then the wood cut off the thermal bridge. Why did I do that? That allowed me to then place my rafters vertically to make my framework, to sandwich the panels, and then to use them and install the wood cladding.
And the wood cladding, does that give you...
Additional insulation.
That's it, it's extra insulation, and it's also the natural look.
And the natural country look, because we're in the countryside. Otherwise, we could have used those trendy panels that everyone is putting everywhere these days. It's composite wood with, I don't know what inside, but it costs 80 euros per square meter. So we're talking about a different budget. And I don't know if it's very insulating. I wanted to focus on insulation. I have polyurethane. I have the container wall with the corrugations, the polyurethane that blocks me, the corrugations where air gets trapped inside, 8 centimeters of air curtains and 2.5 centimeters of wood cladding.
So in terms of heat loss, have you seen any significant results since you tried to minimize these thermal bridging effects as much as possible? Earlier we saw that it was 21 degrees inside, while outside it was around 12 or 13.
Not even, I think it was 9. We were at 10 degrees, I think. This morning it was 21.5, and yes, it was at 11 o'clock. I told you, right? That's it. So it's also the orientation of the house. So last night I ran a radiator from 9 p.m. to this morning at 8 a.m. set to 17 degrees. So I just kept the temperature at 17 degrees. I turned them off at 8 o'clock. When you arrived home at 11 o'clock, it was around 21 degrees.
Yes, everything was heated by the sun.
The sun, the bay windows. So I put in double glazing, not triple, because with double you don't lose solar radiation. Whereas with triple, actually, it's less hot in the summer, but it doesn't heat the house in the winter. Triple glazing, actually, is good for certain times of the year, but for others, it's not good.
And actually, didn't you put in 2 roofs to block some of the sun's rays in the summer?
There might be a pergola coming later.
So no overhang, nothing at all there really, all the sunlight comes in.
Well, it's still nice to have sunlight coming in. In the summer anyway, the house is open. I have the sliding glass door facing south, which is open, and I have the 2 sliding glass doors facing east, which are open. The tilt and turn windows allow the house to be ventilated, even in hot weather. If it's 30 degrees outside, it'll be 30 degrees inside, but at least it's not a big deal.
Anyway, we'll talk a bit about ventilation later, I think. So for everything inside the house and all that.
Yes, it's true that we'll get to that later.
Gradually, we're beginning the envelope, and once complete, we'll proceed to the interior. For now, the entire envelope is nearly done. We observed the roofs a bit, we observed the walls, and we still have the roof left. You chose a flat steel tray roof on top, right?
With a half slope?
Half slope. Anyway, a slope is required to let the water flow.
Yes, indeed.
You chose the steel tray, which you might want to cover later for the green roof.
Which is officially covered by a green roof. Actually, the steel tray, it's about the cost of a steel tray compared to a tiled roof. First of all, you would need more slope for the water to run off, and that's the cheapest option. So I chose anti-condensation steel tray. There's a film underneath to prevent condensation, so I don't get droplets or things like that. It was installed in 1 day.
Okay, so with a strip, actually, what you did is you put down your polyurethane, then you installed your framework, so in a slope. You installed a steel tray on top to create a slope, which you concealed with a parapet.
That's it. Actually, the wall is above the roof, so we hide the roof with the height of the walls. And around it, we made a parapet to avoid the gap between the rafters and the airflow.
And precisely to finish with the whole exterior construction part before talking about the interior layout. Can you estimate how many days of work you had before it was, I wouldn't say livable, but at least...
Weatherproof and airtight?
Weatherproof and airtight, that's it, that's what we want.
I'll give you the answer later because I'm going to look at the photos from when I started building and when I finished the siding. But I think it was there like that. I might be saying something wrong, but I really need to give you the answer. I have the precise dates and have taken over 700 photos documenting the house construction progress through all its stages.
Everything you tell me. The roof, we put it up in a day, cut it, taking a few days in total. On the other hand, you told me the installation took 3 weeks.
I'll check as well. I'll give you all the details. But you see, there are phases, and besides, you can't mess up the insulation. We had to take the time to think. We had to put up the panels, weld the anchor bolts, so it took more time. It was in November or December, and the weather was terrible with rain. When you arrive at the site, you sink in by 2 to 10 centimeters. No, it doesn't make you want to work. It's cold, and you're soaked. I took my time completing this project. I could have finished much faster, but I wasn't in a rush.
You've worked on construction sites during the winter, which is interesting.
Ah, yes, it was fine. I submitted the building permit in February 2016, February or March 2016. So in March, April, May, June, July, I did the foundations. I started sometime in July, August, or September. So the containers were set down. I don't remember the date either, but we'll find it. And then I did the interior of the containers. The advantage was that the containers were set just before autumn. So I was able to work inside the containers sheltered from the rain.
I think that here on the exterior, we already have a good picture of the work you've been able to do and so on. So maybe now we can focus more on the interior. From the moment we were watertight and airtight. And take a look at the work you've managed to put in place. So here for the floor, you chose laminate, a floating floor then.
A floating floor, yes.
Or what you were also explaining to us is that actually the original container floor could have also been a very good choice then.
So with first strip containers, you could keep the floor by insulating the containers from underneath because there's always a thermal bridge, since there are screws that go into the beams underneath to stabilize all the floors. On the other hand, with some stripping and sanding, the exotic red wood could be interesting as it's a noble wood. Rot resistant, targeted, etc. And they are very good woods. But the problem was these were last strip containers, so the floors weren't smashed, but they were very marked up. It would have really needed to be sanded down very deeply, so I prefer to insulate instead. So there's 3 centimeters of red wood, 3 centimeters of polyurethane, 1 millimeter of underlayment, and 8 millimeters of floating floor. It's an underlayment for the floating floor. It's to even out some of the rough spots. It's a kind of very thin bubble film.
That you put on top of the polyurethane, so between the polyurethane and the floating floor.
Yes, between the polyurethane and the floating floor. It's something you put in buildings to also prevent the sound effect. When you walk on it, it reduces the noise a bit. And especially if you have any rough spots, at least it evens them out for you.
Knowing that you installed the flooring entirely by yourself with the help of your father and...
No, that was a friend who works in home improvement and he helped me install it. In one day, we installed the living room floor. That's 58 square meters, and we did it in a single day.
You said you have to be careful to leave some space at the edges.
Yes.
If you lay it in the summer, it's more spread out.
There you go, there you go. So to lay the parquet, you have to do it in the winter, because in winter, the boards expand less. Because if you lay it in the summer, the boards are a bit bigger. When the cold arrives, the boards shrink slightly. If too much space is left around, it causes the parquet to rise.
To summarize, leave a 1 centimeter gap when laying it in winter and a 2 centimeter gap when laying it in summer.
Yeah, basically that's it.
Yes, because it's going to shrink to 1, you know.
Yeah, basically.
Okay.
We've already talked about it a little bit. So the structural element, all these vertical elements where you use the construction props afterwards, like you said, for the whole structure there. And in the end, since the container was already structurally sound, apart from the large cutouts you made, you didn't have much additional work to do. In particular, we see on some projects where people completely remove the container walls and then rebuild partitions inside. You chose to maintain that partition and not redo any interior partition work.
I'm taking a shortcut to save effort. We become logical and smart, thinking about it. Why remove something just to redo it or move it slightly? We adapt. The room measures 2.5 meters wide by 4 meters long with an area of 10 square meters. Basically, that's it. It's livable. It's nothing fancy. We spend most of our day in the living areas, meaning the living room, dining room, kitchen, and on the terrace in summer or during good weather.
And so actually what that makes me wonder is, since we have this large space here, it's also more about things like heating, for example. So you chose to use electric auxiliary heating since you also have your heating element, which you can tell us a bit about as well. Yeah.
So my DMC heats up. Originally, it's a thermodynamic water heater. It's a mini heat pump that's on a tank, and it collects the heat from the house and heats the hot water tank. The actual heating of the house, I have 2 radiators for the 85 square meters inside, 85, 86 of electric heating. There's 2000 watts and 1500 watts, I think. And so, in terms of costs, I pay 80 euros per month for electricity, heating, and mechanical ventilation, the fridge, and what else? The television, the internet box, just a bit. The PC, which also uses a lot, the PC uses more than the heaters.
It can also heat up.
It heats up.
It heats the container.
I also put some LEDs around the mirror for ambient lighting. But my bulbs, they're not LED bulbs because LED bulbs don't produce heat. I used bulbs from a decade ago that resemble tubes.
Incandescent, that's right. So,
no, they're not filaments. They're low energy bulbs between 5 and 15 watts. That's how it was done. Some heat is released, so it's not much, but still something.
This also leads to the topic of atmospheres. There's the heat, but also as a result, the ventilation. So what choice did you make? Because you mentioned controlled mechanical ventilation, but what choice did you make, for example, for extraction? Because we know that with containers, for example, there are already vents that are used to allow air circulation to prevent issues like internal rotting during the transport of goods. So you didn't go for natural ventilation at all here, right? No, it seems to me that you really went for a system of...
I would have liked to make a Canadian well. Is it a Canadian well or is it, I don't remember anymore. In the south of France, they call it something else. But you had to dig down 2 meters deep, make at least 20 meters in length with a slight slope. Every year you had to maintain the thing because they can bring a bit of salmonella, I think. So there really is, then there was a cost because you have to dig the trench, so I could have done it. A Canadian well or a Provençal well, that's what they also call it. But no, I went with the French product, which is Eldes, a thermodynamic water heater that heats the hot water tank and provides controlled mechanical ventilation.
It's both the water heater and controlled mechanical ventilation at the same time?
That's the question I was asking myself, because you don't have controlled mechanical ventilation in the roof then? The controlled mechanical ventilation system pulls stale air from the bedroom to the outside.
Which pulls all the air. You saw, when you put your hand against the vent, you feel a slight constant airflow.
So you don't have any stale air lingering around. Whatever it is, everything gets pulled out right away.
I don't know. For now, no.
That's the big question about ventilation, because it's very important.
I look healthy. I hope I am.
So how does it work technically? Because you have your water heater, we saw it in the bathroom, and what else do you have? Do you have a pipe that goes all around the container?
Not at all, no. I leave the bathroom door open.
But how is the existing mechanical ventilation system connected to anything?
Because actually over there, it's pulling a lot, the water heater. If you put your hand on the thermodynamic water heater, you can actually feel the air being sucked in.
Where is it pulling from? You said it's pulling from the hole we saw in the container, but then there's something you stuck behind it.
There's polyurethane, but I have air inlets in the crawl space. I have an air inlet to the north, an air inlet to the south, facing each other, one to the north and one to the south.
So air inlets at ground level.
At ground level inside.
And then it pulls towards...
There you go. And actually the air goes up one way through the GTL. There I have an air intake also through the GTL. I have air intakes on the windows. So it's not visible, but the seals have been cut. And like in the bathroom, I don't remember, it's Antoine, I'll show you. There's the seal, you can feel the suction. And the sliding glass doors, actually, when you close your sliding glass doors, you have that furry seal there. And actually you can slightly feel the air passing through. I paid the 2,500 for the water heater there.
New?
New, yes, new. Yes, it's brand new. I browsed online and I really found some good deals. I recirculate the warm air from the house instead of venting it outside, even though it's already been heated once. We spent electricity and money. Instead of throwing it outside and warming up the planet, I heat up my crawl space. That is, I put back a 160 pipe that goes down into the crawl space and blows hot air into my crawl space. So there might be some people who won't, but actually I have a low temperature floor because actually the 18 degrees in the house or the 20 degrees in the house or the 21 there are sent under the house. So that keeps my house below, let's say at an average of 18 degrees or 15 degrees. So already the heat I've used once to heat my house, I use it to heat my crawl space.
On the other hand, in summer, you said you'd rather take it out.
And I'm going to put in a bypass in the summer because actually, when you take air at 35 degrees and put it underneath, the temperature rises quickly. So in the summer, you put in a bypass. It makes a kind of hatch with an opening toward the entrance of the crawl space with a small grill, and actually the air will be vented outside.
And that way, you keep the cool air underneath and it cools your house a bit.
But then that raises the question of installing your systems as well, especially the electrical system. In the system shown in the photos, especially for the water pipes, all the conduits will run underneath.
Everything to the crawl space.
The electrical system was also run through the same process with the meter, linky, etc. You ran everything through the floor since you don't have any interior partitions, everything goes underneath.
I don't have any interior partitions. I don't have an attic, so I have to run them somewhere. I ran them. So there's water that comes in that goes into the crawl space. There's electricity that runs above, and I have my drainage. Everything goes through the crawl space. On one hand, it's convenient, but when you need to work on them, you have to get on all fours with a good flashlight. But at least you can access all your connections, everything, your water, your electricity. Here I have the network cables running through, but at least it's easier to access.
Do you run your cables through a conduit under the container to protect them from rodents, pests, and other potential hazards?
Pests were anti-speciesist.
So the poor pests that started nibbling a bit on the polyurethane, I heard them one night. Yeah, I'm sorry. I put out some little seeds, unfortunately. Yeah, I know. We'll have to cut that part.
What do you mean you put out little seeds?
Oh, yeah, I have to, unfortunately. Because, well, just as polyurethane is the best insulation there is, animals love it because they get inside it, and at night you hear them and you're like, no, not my polyurethane. So now, I know I have a cold spot because they must have made a hole, so I'll have to go underneath and put some good polyurethane to fill up what they did.
But underneath the containers anyway, all your water and electrical wiring, what about them? Are they attached to the containers?
No. So at first I wanted to do that, but actually, since you have 80 centimeters or a meter, actually, I ran them along the wall to bring them up to the GTL, because actually each outlet is independent. There's a cable going to each outlet, so there are 60 outlets. There are 60 modules. Actually, there are about 50 modules. Actually, there are 15 wire runs. I've never made any junction boxes to avoid fire hazards or other electrical problems.
It's like a spider, as you said. We could have used an electrical one.
The spider, actually, you come in with one wire, then you go out again. Whereas here, so it cost me more. For once, it cost me more. But there's an outlet, there's a wire that goes up to the meter. There's another outlet. Each circuit breaker is an outlet.
The spider only has one cable, and then
You redistribute. You can pull the maximum on one 2.5, because I put everything in 2.5 copper cable. You can pull the maximum on this outlet, and on the second one, you can put anything. 3 or 4 kilo. The wires won't melt, the wires won't be at their limit or breaking point.
But then, under your container in your crawl space, all your cables there,
They're laid on the ground.
isn't there any danger down there? You can't put more arrayed everywhere. At some point, there will be some. Visiting annually and adding more isn't feasible. Shouldn't there be another solution?
So could you put them in a... well, first of all, I have cats here. We have 3 or 4 cats.
I saw them go by earlier.
They protect the internet cacks.
But they're hunters. They're hunters.
You could make a metal box and run them through it.
You can, but, it's work, except that the containers, when they deliver them to you, people are happy, so they don't have time.
What happened with your partitions? So what did you do with the partitions?
So I could have insulated, but it wasn't done. But the problem is, you can run that through industrial-style cable ducts.
Yes, metal cable ducts.
Yes, you can use metal cable ducts. Underneath, it's closed off. Normally, it's sealed. Because you saw the entrance to the crawl space, I have grills on the ventilation openings. Normally, there shouldn't be any animals, but there will always be some at some point. But let's say it's still fairly secure.
Because there's a cinder block foundation, so they can't dig through it. They can only get in through the small entrance, but you close it.
Normally, yeah.
In the worst case, even after installation, because you ran all the wiring before the containers were put down. But now, you could go into your crawl space, for example.
I can go there. I go there regularly.
There you go. And you could very well put in another duct there. It might take a whole day to do it properly.
Yes, I think it would take a good day.
That's a good day's work. But technically, I mean, it's doable to put everything together, stick it under the container and...
Yeah, then you put... So what I was thinking was to use clamps for the pipes, the blood clamps, the clamps for water drainage. You put an anchor in the wall, and then you put your plastic clamp. So actually, I would have screwed them either into the wood or onto the rafters underneath. I would have run my conduits through them. It's just a bonus.
By the way, I'm thinking about it now. But when you run your electrical cables under your container into the house, and the same for your water pipes, you have to drill through the container. So you have a hole, you have your thing coming out, yeah, but how do you make sure it's insulated? Well, from the ground, you seal it back up with polyurethane.
So you can either use silicone. Well, it's not a house with thermal regulation or a low energy house, because in low energy houses, when you install an outlet, yes, you have to seal it so there's no air suction because they pressurize and depressurize the house. There's a guy who comes, I can't remember what it's called.
It's for the thermal engineering officers that come to check the initial thermal studies.
That's it. And actually, since it's not a low energy house, I don't need to do that. Yes, corrugated cables are usually installed afterwards using either silicone sealant or expanding foam underneath, with expanding foam being the more common choice. I didn't have that issue since I made the holes to the exact diameter. I had a big drill bit, a 25 millimeter one or something like that, and actually I drilled with that.
But then you run your pipe through afterwards?
After insertion, it fits snugly, comes through, stretches slightly, then settles back into place.
That's what I was explaining to you as well. In front of the container doors before installation, there's a metal plate at the door. I'm trying to remember what we talked about.
You can't drill too deep into the ground due to a metal plate.
Oh, on the edges. For about an inch, actually, there's a metal bracket holding the floor. In fact, you can't drill or run your wires directly along the wall. If you hit the metal, afterwards you can cut it. Anything is possible too.
That's why we'll have to be careful with the environmental regulations coming in 2020. There are little things like that which...
So you were saying about the outlets and all that, did you only use Legrand? Things where you think it's a bit more expensive?
I went with brand names. I chose Legrand. For all the faucets, I picked Grower, except for this one. At least these are things that are done. We won't have to come back to them. Electrical work in a house is typically done for life. And if it's going to cause problems, there have been issues, especially with the electrical panels, on some linking meters too, which have burnt. But at least no one will be able to say that it's your electrical installation that's the problem. Since it's 2.5, it's Legrand, there's a microcircuit breaker, everything is there, everything is done by the book. The inspector has been by. There's a very good ground, because the ground is 7 plus 12, 19. And there's a 1.5 meter stake in the ground as well, under the foundations. So we're already at 80 centimeters plus 1.5 meters. And there are 19 meters of metal braid for the grounding.
And you said you want to try to use a small solar panel to power all of this. So you would need to connect your solar panels to your electrical panel, right? And then your electrical panel.
Yes, but actually the advantage here is that we're going to go through the crawl space. The electrical panels will likely be installed near the outdoor shed and barbecue. And we'll come back with a cable of the right diameter to connect to the electrical panel.
Do you think your house is ready for the 2020 environmental regulations, even if it might not be one of your priorities? There will be requirements for passive houses that produce as much as they consume. Do you think that with the setup you have here under construction with the solar panels, you could achieve that energy passivity? Well, that's a calculation to be made.
I believe the answer is yes, but I can't say for certain as I lack the necessary expertise to make that calculation. I know that for now it costs me 80 euros a month for electricity to heat my place all year and for the lights. As you mentioned, it's all about calculations. Installing enough solar panels, wind turbines, and everything needed is certainly possible, but it comes with a cost. We can manage it later, but you must change your lifestyle. It's evident that there will be changes.
Also a prerequisite, it seems to me, for environmental regulations. So I don't remember at all how much it is. We'll have to mention it in the comments about consumption in kilowatt hours per square meter. The environmental regulation still under discussion is not yet finalized as the Environmental Regulation 2022. But all those issues will be there. So yes, maybe there will be calculations to do or something, but are you then trying to reach that goal? So in terms of consumption,
I want to consume as little as possible, so it costs me as little as possible. And then, as I checked, I had 480 euros of electricity consumption for the whole year. And I pay 800 and something, I think it's 860. My consumption is 480 euros. All the rest is just tax, so for electricity consumption, I'm at 480 euros. You'd have to calculate the price per kilowatt hour, and then we'd have the annual consumption.
So I think we've covered everything. We've pretty much gone over it all.
There's the bathroom and toilet area for the electrical part. So it seems pretty simple, since you said you just put power strips here and there. On these power strips, you plug in remote switches, so you can turn on all your lamps with your remote. So you have a very, very simple electrical setup. I want to say, without any special skills, you managed to do it quite easily. Some But for the water, you have to run all your water pipes, you have to install the toilet, the shower, the faucet. Are there any prefabricated things that are easy to connect, or is it...
I did everything myself, including setting up my manifold. The manifold is where you have your main supply, which is a 20 or 25 millimeter pipe. I don't recall the exact diameter.
What is it? Is it the thing that's outside?
The plymouth is actually your water supply that comes from outside, which goes through your water meter. So you have the plymouth coming in, you have the water meter, and then you have a manifold with all the little valves. Actually, each part of your house has a valve that corresponds to it. That means you can shut off the sink, the shower, the toilet, etc. independently.
Over there, they install a lot of valves for you.
Yeah, no, it's not over there. Over there, it's just the main supply. They bring you the big pipe. The excavator operator came to install that for me when he filled it back in. He's the one who installed the plymouth for me. So he installed the plymouth, he connected it over there, and he connected it here. I was the one who connected it. We connected to a manifold with faucets. I'll show you the pictures, and you can shut off all the sections. I also installed a brass faucet. In the winter, I shut it off.
Okay, and so after that is just a long cable. There's an outlet, right? No, you only have one outlet. It's the main sewer, right? Is that it?
The main sewer, yes. There's the famous pipe that goes down along the wall and then goes down again and leads to the main sewer.
Well, so it's simple. You just have to, everything goes in there.
There you go.
However, to get here, you have several entrances, you know. Then simply connect input to output repeatedly.
The main entrance, the 25 plymouth, leads to the manifold. After the manifold, you distribute with your pipes. So 2 pipes for the shower, 2 pipes for the sink, 2 pipes for the kitchen, hot water and cold water, right? When I say 2 pipes. 1 pipe for the toilet, 1 water supply pipe for the thermodynamic water heater, 1 pipe also for the washing machine, and I think that's all, and 1 pipe to go outside. You already need around 10 small valves to connect.
Knowing that some of your valves, perhaps 10, are for cold water while others go through your water heater.
1 pipe goes up to the water heater, then comes back down and passes through the hot water manifold. There is also a cold water manifold.
After that, it's just wiring.
Like you said, it's a simple principle too, where you gathered all your wet areas in one corner to avoid having to run pipes everywhere. After that, it's the basics in this kind of construction.
So there are times when you look at the plans, you have the kitchen next to it, and then you think...
It depends if it's an apartment. Sometimes they run ducts up both, and then it's between apartments. Of course, it depends on the setup, especially regarding this question, even in terms of the living environment. So that's a question we discussed with Julian and with your family too. Also these things about the living atmosphere. In this kind of house where we have this large living space, but where the bedrooms are directly accessible from the entrance. So don't you miss having maybe some separation between your day spaces and your night spaces? Or is it more a lifestyle that you developed over time?
No, I like this structure because actually we live together here with my partner and her daughters. And if the girls want to be alone, they go to their room. If they want to go outside, well, they go outside. But no, it's just things. I prefer a large living space over a big bedroom. To be locked up in your room. It's better to participate and talk with the people around you.
And besides, you said you saved money on the work because you were able to reuse your panels and everything. When you look at the bedroom, the size doesn't matter in the end. As long as there's enough space for the bed and wardrobe, that's sufficient.
There's 9.5 square meters with a walk-in closet. The bed, it's a perfectly decent bed. It's 2 80-centimeter mattresses.
And after that, your whole life is here and outside.
You spend it here, relaxing, on the couch, in the living room, in the kitchen.
You hear, Mom, there's no need for a hallway.
No, that was before hallways. At my parents' place, there are lots of hallways too. There's a big hallway with lots of rooms on the right and left. There's a hallway that leads to the 3 bedrooms and the bathroom. And now my father put a door in front again to close it precisely to save a bit on heating. But that was before, now it's over. The houses were also less insulated before. We didn't have the same materials, we didn't have the same regulations either, yet it's a house from the 70s. But it's true that they had the attic insulated. They also put insulation in the basement because they have a basement, a 70s house with a basement. But it's true that their house is colder than mine. First of all, it's tiles, it's marble or tiles, and tiles are cold. You can walk barefoot on the floor because it's made of wood. It's warmer. When you wake up in the morning, your feet don't freeze on the tile floor. There are no carpets because my daughter-in-law is asthmatic, so there are dust mites and so on to keep in mind. But I think it's nice in the morning, it's pleasant.
That's why, in terms of atmosphere, we're in something that, like I said when we first came in, it's really about this whole thing with the sound, the interior layout, and so on. It's really something we're not used to, at least as people from Lyon living in our apartments. And it's definitely a lifestyle that really deserves to be experienced as it is.
You must come for a weekend. It's not an issue at all.
You can host a bed and breakfast or be an entrepreneur host.
We can do it, we can do it. We put a container at the back, we make a guest room with a beautiful view of the fields in front, and it would be nice.
And precisely about those fields, precisely about the outdoor layout. So where you have this house, since you came to set it up, rather by the roadside, etc.
So by the roadside, well, by the path, I would say.
Yes, by the path, by the highway, you have the required 3-meter setback, etc. And so for your outdoor arrangements, did you also choose to reuse things like we'll see in the report, etc.? Did you decide to reuse?
Well, the walls there, the container walls are by the roadside being finished with a metal and wood fence. The container doors where there was the bay window here, the 2 container doors were reused to make a kitchen. So, a kitchen, a summer barbecue with a wood stove and a barbecue at the end. So it served as a wall.
A screen, that's it, right?
A screen, yeah,
Outside, it's the door she has.
of course.
I hadn't noticed.
The compost that's downstairs where there will soon be chickens too. It's the door of the container that was set up right and fixed. What else did I salvage? My father made a solid compost bin with the doors that were cut out. My father made it with 2 compartments. He took the doors, laid them down, which gave him the height for his... There you go. We reused the materials we bought and the cat. He's the one who eats the mice. Yes, we try to reuse as much as possible. And well, it works pretty well.
And for the terrace outside, how did you go about it? So
For the terrace, we started by putting a geotextile on the ground, and we waited for the ground to settle for a year. We put down a geotextile. I didn't want to use plastic pedestals because plastic isn't good for the planet, so we didn't use plastic pedestals. We used cinder blocks and paving stones that I salvaged, and that allowed us to create a slight slope on the terrace. We have 1 or 2 centimeters of slope for the 42 meters of the terrace.
but in the end, that's pretty quick. In fact, you don't need to dig any foundation. You just have to...
No, no foundation. We have, well, so it took a few days and it was, I don't know, in days. It lasted maybe 2 or 3 weeks, but in 3 days it was done.
And like you said, no need for prior declaration. I don't know if for the terrace you need a prior declaration.
I think from a certain square meter, so it's not 42 square meters, there's only 8.50 square meters of terrace.
And then outside, you made some little garden corners, the small shed. You tried to set up the outside a bit.
A nice little spot, a small relaxing zen corner, the jacuzzi area, I don't know. We have a little spot, a small shed for a garden shelter, to put tools, the lawnmower, the girls' bikes, a small workbench for tinkering. And then we have the orchard area that's starting to grow. When the animals don't come to eat my trees with the buds, they have the right to eat too. So there will be an orchard area, a little spot. Yes, let's say traditional farming. And finally, peaceful, it means we don't force nature. If the potatoes grow, they grow. If they don't, oh well, we'll eat something else. The peppers will grow. They're growing in the house right now. And the tomatoes too. But really, we're not obsessed with farming. If it grows, great. If not, too bad. We plant, water, and mulch them, then they manage independently.
It's all smooth sailing, you know.
It must go smoothly, but if not, it's not a big deal. There are worse things in life.
And above all, you've built a system where you pay back your loan little by little for the land. The rest you managed to do through self-building and self-financing, so you were able to be at ease.
It's great that I owe very little to the banks. That means we have freedom and can do as we please. And above all, yeah, the hardest part was knowing where I was going at the beginning, if my budget would be enough, if I would always be able to keep working, because things can change quickly. If you have a problem and you can't work for 6 months, it's a bit complicated, but everything went well. And then little by little, things start to fall into place.
Okay.
Maybe we'll wrap it up here then.
Yeah, I think we've pretty much covered everything. Also, if some of you are still interested, there's this book that's really interesting. Right now, we're reading it with Antoine. It covers everything from A to Z. But then there's a difference between theory and practice. Since we've seen with you on all the photos you gave us, all the little tips you had, it's a lot of things you thought of maybe at the last moment where you adapted.
I thought it through beforehand. For a year to a year and a half, there was a lot of thinking, research, and information gathering for the foundations, though some things were later adapted. You can't mess those up. That's really important. The containers, well, I found those directly in Lyon. That's thanks to my previous job when I was at Renault Trucks. So after that, everything falls into place. You shouldn't put too much pressure on yourself. If it's not working, just throw down the hammer, come back tomorrow. It's no big deal. You can throw down the grinder too when you get frustrated, but you can also hit the containers. That works, but yeah. The point is, if you don't put pressure on yourself, you'll eventually get what you want sooner or later. It might take longer, but no pressure already helps you a lot.
That's a good conclusion. We covered quite a few things, and there were also things we talked about in the report that we didn't cover here. The two videos complement each other. If you've watched this video but not the report, it's linked in the card and description. Go watch the report as it's complementary. And then there's all the other data. And maybe we'll keep making reports on these topics about container houses and other alternative types of housing.
That's a secret for later.
We might go visit factories that build container houses. This time it's more focused on the industrial aspect rather than self-building, just to make a comparison and see what they have to say. Many reports are emerging about Demos Kratos. So don't forget to subscribe and activate the notification bell so you don't miss any of these upcoming videos. And above all, don't forget to support us on TP, because that's what allows us to keep going. That's what will allow me to have a decent salary so I can build myself a container house.
You see the red thread starting to unfold in front of you. We're starting here, and we'll end up with a nice house.
In a year, you'll see a video of me either building my container house, pursuing a different project, or not doing it at all.
Maybe it'll be a failure.
Maybe it'll be an A-frame house or a stroke laywood house.
Ah, the famous A-frame house. You still haven't watched the documentary?
Maybe it'll be full of projects. What's certain is that we're going to have a lot of fun. Thank you, Bruno, for introducing us to all this. See you soon on Demos Kratos. Goodbye.
Hello, this is the end of the report.